Yeah. So, well, let us get on with 1 and 2 Kings, which is, and this is being recorded. So I will tell Katie to start it, she can edit the recording. And so we'll start now. Okay. And I'm going to share my screen and share. There we go. I'm not doing it in the usual mode because we can fiddle around with the presentation. So this is the introduction here. And the first thing I'm going to go over is geography, which sounds kind of dumb, but unless you kind of understand what this place looks like, it's some of the stuff that goes on doesn't make much sense. So the first thing you need to know is that the height ranges here. Mount Hermon, which is way up here, is the highest mountain on the Mediterranean East Coast. And that's kind of the northern end of Israel in this period, okay, though it does sometimes push northwards toward Damascus. And so that's 9,232 feet tall. And to give you an idea of that, if I go over 8,000, I have a hard time breathing. Okay, found that out in the Grand Canyon, north side. On the other hand, way down now the Mount Hermon gets snow, okay, and the snow melt comes down and fills. It comes out at a spring up near Dan and creates the Jordan River, which goes through the Sea of Galilee and down the Jordan River. Now, the Jordan River is not big. I mean, think the Sudbury River, okay? It's not a huge kind of entity. And that drains into the Dead Sea. And the Dead Sea is at minus 1,411 feet below sea level, below sea level. Okay, so it drops precipitously. And one of the reasons for this is that this is a fault. It's a rift valley. Remember the Rift Valley in Africa that's slowly going apart and revealing all those old hominid bones and whatnot? This is the northern extension of that fault. Okay, so and there have been volcanoes along here. This area over here into right around in here is a huge basalt field. And when you look at the remains of synagogues along the Sea of Galilee, they're actually, and the houses, they're actually made of black stone because it's made out of this basalt and tufa and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, so this is basically the only river in the whole area, and the Dead Sea has no outlet. There is no outlet, so it just evaporates, and it gets saltier and saltier and saltier. So, and because of that, today they can mine the salts in the southern. This whole southern area here is almost gone because it's just salt pans. So, but that's today. This is back then. Now there's like 4 or 5 ranges here. This is the Eastern Desert, which actually has minerals in it. And this was over in here was the location of Solomon's gold mines. These are called the Transjordan Mountains. This is Jordan over here, which comes right up to the Jordan River. This is the Rift Valley, as I said. This is the Central Mountain Range, and this is where Jerusalem is. And we'll see in a minute how low these mountains actually are. And then there's low hills here, and that's called the Shepha. I think it is. I think that's the Bishepha or something like that. We'll see it in the next slide. Hey, Andel.
Hi, sorry I'm late, but I ran as fast as I could from the 8 o'clock.
No, I understand. But you're just in the first slide, so don't worry about it.
Okay.
And these
Victoria.
are the coastal. And these are the coastal plains, which the Israelites never really occupied. Therefore, they were never really next to the ocean, and therefore they never really learned how to sail ships. I mean, they could sail small ones in the Sea of Galilee, and they did sail them across the Dead Sea, but over here, they didn't have the chutzpah to be an ocean sailor. And we'll see that later on when Solomon goes in with the king of Phoenicia, which is up here. This is Phoenicia in the north, and these are the Philistines in the south. And he does trading missions with the king of Phoenicia. Okay, any questions about that? You can see where various places are. Here's Jerusalem. You find Jerusalem on the map as you find the north end of the Dead Sea, and you just go west, and there's Jerusalem. Shechem is another important place, as you'll see. That becomes a religious center. And you'll notice that these mountains kind of go to Mount Carmel, which is a high point on the coast. And east of that is the Jezreel Valley, which is one of the farming places in the area.
Chris?
Yes.
Do you know how much, was the scarcity of water something that folks may have explored that led to it?
Well, actually, during this period that we're going to go over in First and Second Kings, apparently it was a wet period.
Okay.
So that wasn't a problem until like the 600s.
Okay, thank you.
When everything was going to hell in a handbasket anyway. So now you have to remember the size of this whole region from Dan down to here, okay, is basically the size of New Jersey. We're not talking about a big place here. So if you've ever driven in New Jersey from top to bottom in 2.5 hours, 3 hours, that's it. That's the size of this place. It's not big. Any other questions about that? No? So here, we'll go to the next one. And this is the height difference, okay? The Shephelah is this hill places. So we have the coastal plain where the Philistines are, or the Phoenicians. The Shephelah, which are like, foothills. And then we have the Central Mountain. Now notice Central Mountains here is like 2,500 feet. Okay, so that's not very tall in terms of mountains. And then, of course, it drops to the Dead Sea. And then it goes back up to Mount Nebo. And you can see why when Moses stood on Mount Nebo, he could see everything to the west, because it's fairly high. And this valley is fairly long in here. And the Transjordanian Mountains in the Eastern Desert. So, so this area is pretty much higher than this area down here. And after all, this is a rift valley, and there are earthquakes, but none that we know of during this period. Okay. Now, vegetation. You have to remember that this world is very different from ours. I'm trying to get the not letting me do it. I don't like this thing. Okay, there we go. Okay, so this is a vegetation that they think is in biblical times, and I'm sorry it's not a better map, but that's life. So it's more forested than it is today. I mean, a lot more forested, and this, a lot of this was cleared for agriculture. You can see down here this valley, the Jezreel Valley. There's just a little bit of scrub and grassland, but actually a lot of this was cleared eventually. Now down here you have desert. All this orange stuff is desert, but you'll also notice that these blue areas are oases. And so there's a lot of oases along here. So even today, if you go down in here, well, there used to be resorts that you could go to and you'd swim in the Dead Sea. Unfortunately, the Dead Sea is beginning to dry up because of the amount of water being taken out of the Jordan River. So some of these resorts are now half a mile or more from the shore of the Dead Sea instead of being right on it. But you can see this, yeah?
Is it odd that the Rift Valley is a desert when it's got a river running through the middle of it?
Yeah, well, have you ever been out to Utah? I can remember going to Utah and, you know, it was desert, river. I mean, it was weird. And when they say desert here, it's like it was probably more of a desert here than it is today, because there's some irrigation going on. But this was also considered wilderness. And you remember David has to protect his flock from lions. There were lions wandering through here. There were lions and other kinds of awful critters. Now there are no more of them, but back then there were. And so this is basically scrub, and where you see the light green stuff and the dry forest there was a lot of grazing going on in there. And a lot of this area was, the agriculture was, a lot of it was olive oil, olive trees, and which would grow well in this kind of dry foresty area. And they exported the olive oil to Egypt and north to Turkey and places like that. There was a lot of trade that went on. We always think of people, ancient peoples, as kind of sitting still, but they really didn't. I mean, when you think of people going to Jerusalem for a big festival like Passover, it's like a 3 or 4 day walk from up here to down there. Okay, so it's temperature wise, it gets in the 40s in the winter, and it gets 80s in the summer. Now, of course, it's much warmer, but once in a while they do get snow in Jerusalem, even today. Any questions about that?
Chris, when you say grazing area, what sort of animals would be grazing?
Goats,
Oh,
sheep.
okay. Right.
I
I was thinking they wouldn't necessarily have cattle per se, like we know it.
some,
today.
but not a whole lot. Not a whole lot. Okay. And I don't know about dairy cattle. That's an interesting question. I mean, cattle are mentioned in the Bible, but not to a great extent. Sheep and goats are more of a, if you're going to trade somebody something, you trade them a goat or something like that,
Right.
that in fact, when that, remember the story in Genesis about the brother um, who won't have sex with his sister-in-law in order to produce an heir for his dead brother. And she plays the prostitute. And so he promises her a goat. And so she takes his belt as surety. And when he comes back to give her the goat, she's not there. And so, but that's the kind of thing you trade goats for.
Okay. Okay.
There are other things too, of course, but that's one of the places where they mention goats. Now, you notice these little blue areas here that are labeled oases.
Mhm.
Those are areas where you can they're usually in ravines or in breaks in the limestone. All of this, a lot of this stuff from about here on down is limestone. Limestone, of course, can develop caves, i.e. Dead Sea caves. Makes sense. But they also means that you can have springs because the water that when it rains, the water goes down and it's slightly acidic. So it over, thousands and tens of thousands of years, it dissolves the limestone and it'll come out when it reaches the surface. And so these blue areas are areas where this water has come out to reach the surface. And that's also why you can dig wells and get water from the wells. And they're actually, the wells are pretty stable. I mean, there are still wells today that people used 3,000 years ago. So that's, from our point of view, that's pretty stable. Okay. So to give you an idea of the rainfall, now this is a modern rainfall, but this will give you an idea of what goes on. Okay. So this pink and above, pink is over 44 inches a year. And notice the only place that gets that kind of precipitation is Mount Hermon. So to give you a comparison, Boston gets about 44 inches a year. Okay. And again, this is the modern rainfall amount. So it could have been wetter during this time. I read several papers about they didn't do what they thought was the average rainfall, but they did say, there were places where it got, sorry, I got something in my eye. They did do, they did kind of estimate what people were growing and what kind of water that would would be required. And basically they said that during this period, from about 1000 to 600, it was wetter than usual. And so, they had a lot of olive trees and that kind of stuff. So they could do, they could grow grain, for instance, wheat. They didn't grow corn because that's a New World thing, and we're a few thousand years off from that. So they grew grain. They had, pomegranates and fig trees and date palms and olive trees and they grew grain. So it was a fairly productive area during this period. But that gives you an idea of the kind of rain. And nowadays, of course, the Israelis do grow food in here, and they have the ones that have pioneered drip irrigation. They're the ones who kind of invented drip irrigation. So there you go. Any other questions about that? Hey, cat. Okay. So, so that's the mean annual rainfall. So it's not, you can see it's not terribly wet, but it's enough to grow food. Time. Historical periods. You know, I'm just putting things in context here, okay? For those of you who are really into historical periods, we have the Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age, and this is when Genesis and Exodus take place, okay? So that's from 2000 to basically 1200. And that's Genesis and Exodus. Now, there's a lot of stuff that goes on. There are, huge empires during this period. Egyptians, the Mesopotamian empires, there's empires in Turkey, but Jordan itself is basically settled in nomadic groups. There's no cities that are fortified, there's towns. And the sea peoples, who are basically the Philistines, invade and settle on the coast, as we saw before. They settle right here, down this area. Okay. So, let's see. And the Hyksos, well, you don't have to know about them, but it's one of those peoples that wander around conquering things. And Egypt expelled the Hyksos from this area and took control. So we don't think of Egypt as controlling Canaan, but they did. And over here, this is the biblical events. And over here we have the prophets. Now, both Moses and his sister Miriam were prophets. And prophets, again, are not people who predict the future. They're the ones who speak the word of God. And one of the ways in which the word of God is verified is that they say this will happen, and their words make that thing happen. And when that thing happens, people say, "Oh, you're a prophet, aren't you?" So here we go. Now this is our part of our period. It begins with the Iron Age, and again, the Philistines are on the coast. There's small villages up in the mountains, and the Phoenicians, which were, of course, way up here, begin to spread their alphabet. And the Phoenician alphabet is the basis for our alphabet. And this is the occupation of the Israelites and the period of Judges, which goes for about 200 years. Now, one of the things about the Iron Age is that this is the Bronze Age is where they learn how to smelt bronze, which is copper and tin melted together to create fairly, well, you've seen a bronze statue, right? That's bronze. I mean, I can't think of any nearby except the Civil War statue in front of the Village Hall or in front of the Historical Society in Framingham. But it's bronze. It's a fairly hard metal, but you can't make plows out of it because it bends too easily. So iron is much better for plows and scythes for cutting your wheat. And the Philistines have a monopoly on that. And it's not until the Second Iron Age, around 950, 1000, that the Israelites end up with that technology. And therefore, they don't have to go to the Philistines to get their scythes made and sharpened and their plows and all that kind of stuff. Now, 2 dates you need to know here. I'm going to move this up. 2 dates you need to know. Think the year 1000 BCE, before Common Era, and then the year 586, 587. Okay, doesn't matter which one you pick one. This chart happens to pick 587, but it could be 586. I'm not terribly sure. So those 2 dates are basically the beginning and end date of Kings. David starts ruling around 1000, and Kings starts with basically David's old age and his death. So 1000, okay, now, and basically there's only a United Kingdom for about 75 years under David and Solomon. And then it falls apart, and you have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom gets taken out by the Assyrians. The Babylonians conquer the Assyrians and eventually take out the southern kingdom. And it's also during, I mean, at this point, you see up here the Phoenicians spread the alphabet. Hebrew is being written down during this period. And so things like Deuteronomy is written down, and Genesis and Exodus are parts of it are written down. And so this is the beginning of writing down the Bible, or what eventually becomes the Bible. So that's the significance of Phoenicians in the alphabet, for us anyway. Now over in the prophet column here, you notice that we have 2 prophets. What? Somebody say
Sorry,
something?
1586 is when the Bible starts to get written down.
No, around the year, around year 1000 is when things start being, what do we call it? Start being written down, like, and I don't mean whole books, I mean parts of books. So you have the Southern Kingdom's version of Noah's Ark, and you've got the Northern Kingdom's version of Noah's Ark. And later on, they put the 2 together like this. But this is when the stories start to be written down, and the chronologies start written down. You'll find as we go through Kings, and the rest of his acts were written in the annals of the king. I mean, it actually refers to other books in Kings. But so this is basically our 500 years here, or less than 500 years, that we're going to be talking about. And we have prophets over here for the United Monarchy, or Samuel and Nathan. Samuel, of course, 2 books are named after him. And Nathan is the one who is David's kind of court prophet. And then down here in the Northern Kingdom, we have Elijah, Elisha, Amos, and Hosea. All those are happening in the Northern Kingdom during this period. And then the Southern Kingdom, we have all these prophets, some of whom are actually named in the books, like Isaiah and Jeremiah, Elijah, Elisha, and I don't think Amos and Hosea are actually mentioned in Kings, but I know Isaiah and Jeremiah are. So part of this is going to be talking about prophets as much as named prophets, as well as groups of prophets. And then in 587, what happens is you get exile, and there's exile for about 50 years. And then people come back, but that's beyond our scope. I just wanted to show you that that's there. Any questions about that? No?
Very cool.
What?
Very cool.
Very cool. Okay. So now we get, I should, one of the things I haven't talked about is we're going to go down here, and is that first and second Samuel, first and second Kings are actually all one book. So we're kind of starting in the middle. And there are certain incidents and things that are mentioned that we have to go back and read in Samuel to get why stuff is happening in Kings. Okay, so when David gets pissed at somebody and tells Solomon to take care of it just before he dies, i.e., this is the mafia boss kind of thing, you take care of that, and sure enough, it's taken care of. So expect mafia types of events in this book. And expect Bathsheba to do her thing, because queen mothers are actually important and powerful people in this. They're mentioned. Every king has a queen mother that's mentioned, which is highly unusual. But anyway, so why are these 4 books? First, Second Samuel, First, Second Kings. Why are there 4 books? Well, these books were put together from a bunch of different sources. Some of the stuff in there is folk tales. Some of it is actual stories being recounted from the annals of the kings. Some of it is interactions with prophets and things like that. But it's all there for one specific purpose, and that's to show you why Israel fell and why people were exiled. And that is embodied in these 3 paragraphs. And so as you go through Kings and see good kings and bad kings, and this is why this king only reigned 2 days, and blah, 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 blah. It's all because if you do good, God will bless you. If you don't, you're out of luck. So somebody want to read that first paragraph? Can everybody see the first paragraph?
See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess.
Okay, so that's it. Okay, if you love God and walk in God's ways, you'll be blessed. Who wants to read the second paragraph?
I will. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall certainly perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses.
Okay, So what specifically are they not supposed to do?
They're not supposed to bow down to other gods and be led astray.
Right. Now, notice that this has nothing to do with morality per se. Okay. This has to do with your heart. If your heart turns away, because if you remember David, David is no, innocent. Okay. He orders the murder of his one of his commanders because he's gotten the commander's wife pregnant. He does other things that God doesn't want him to do, but he's always turned back to God. And so his heart was with God. And so that's the reason why God blesses him. But if your heart turns away, and as we go through Kings, you'll see this, where the king's hearts are is the important thing. And if their heart is with an idol, that's not good.
Well, then, quick question, Chris. What's
Yeah.
the difference then between that and strict obedience to the commandments?
Well, that's the thing is that if you love God, you'll walk in his ways, i.e., you'll do what he asks you to do, like, observing this holiday and not killing people and, doing all that. I mean, one of the reasons why David doesn't build the temple is because his hands are stained with blood. And so that task is given to Solomon, who doesn't go out and lead armies. Okay. So, hey, Lexi. So why are you still at home?
No,
I
there's
see.
in the church.
No, she's in the meditation room with me now.
I know, but she's also on the board too.
Oh,
There we go. Okay. Where were we? I can't remember. So this whole idea that where your heart is. So if your heart is, with God, you're willing to walk in God's ways. But if your heart is with an idol, you walk in the idol's ways, which, as you'll see, get pretty gruesome at times. Okay. Who wants to read that last paragraph? I can read it. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live, loving the Lord your God, obeying him and holding fast to him. For that means life to you in length of days, so that you may live in the land that the Lord swore to give to your ancestors, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Okay, notice that loving the Lord your God, holding fast to him, and obeying him. Those are the three kind of things. So, and that means life. To go away from God means death. So this is the whole theological basis behind first and second things. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. And that means loving God, obeying God, and holding fast to God. Go cat. Chipmunks have appeared at the window. Any comments on that?
I have a big question, right? And it,
Yes,
this
ma'am.
week or last week, Madeline in school went online and sort of looked at the poverty index, and it would show you pictures of, you know, what it meant to live on $1 a day versus, you know, $1,000 and up at WIT, right? And she was profoundly, yes, impacted and upset, right? And to recognize where we fell on the scale of this globally, right?
Yeah.
And why. And I think, you know, other people have experienced, why do some people get so ill when they're so wonderful? And so I think in part of our culture, from these readings, there's this tradition that, or misinterpretation, or but you can hear this idea of God's blessings, right? And who's blessed and who's not blessed. And it's interesting as I'm reading this, right? Because part of me is like, you know, she was thinking, you know, why was I born here in the US and why was I lucky that way, right? Versus other folks. And it's just, it's interesting, right? Because I have a hard time believing that somewhere, I mean, if you read this, right, somewhere in my lineage, people were good, and that's why I'm here and not born in sub-Saharan Africa. But
Yeah.
right, but is it more than that in the condition of when you're born? Keep with the God and have less. I mean, I also lived in El Salvador, and among poverty, there's plenty of blessings and joy. Just looks different. So,
Yeah.
this is pretty existential, I guess.
Well, no, it's not. And there are books in the Bible that have tried to deal with that. I mean, that's what Job is about. Why do bad things happen to good people? And because you remember through all that, Job's friends keep telling him that, well, you must have done something wrong. Otherwise, this wouldn't happen to you. And he says, no, I've done nothing wrong. And he's absolutely right. He has done nothing wrong. But he is also not going to let God off the hook. He wants to know why. And in the end, he finds out that oh my God, I'm dealing with something I can't understand. But in this is one of the things that this is explicitly talking about is the nation of Israel. Okay, the Israelites. It's not talking about people in general. It's talking about the Israelites, period. Okay. And so the blessings and the curses come to them as a result of the relationship with God, whether it's good, whether they're holding fast to God or they're going off to idols. Okay. And that specificity, okay, is important to the book. And one thing after another, points that out. This is not talking about Assyrians or Babylonians or Egyptians or Americans or, Europeans or Chinese or anybody else. It's talking specifically about Israel. Okay. Everyone outside that, Israel had a hard enough time kind of figuring it out what their relationship was. And they really didn't go into other people's relationships. Except in a very few cases, and they were willing to entertain that you could go with God and not be an Israelite. I mean, we'll come across the specific instance of a eunuch of all types, and he what happens with him and God, and how he tells the prophet, he says, please know that I have to go in with the king to these temples to worship the idols, but that's part of my duties. But he basically says, my heart's not in it. My heart is with God. And he actually takes home dirt from Israel because gods are kind of part of the land for most people. That's something else we should say. One of the reasons why this becomes so important is because the Israelites, when they are exiled to Babylon, and one reason why they're exiled to Babylon is that they're taken away from their God, which is rooted in the land. And when one people's conquers another people's, that means that the God of the conquering peoples is stronger than the God of the conquered peoples. Okay. So they have this problem. Well, we got exiled from our land. What happens to our God? And so this also explains, God's still there. And it was God who exiled you. It wasn't some big fancy, Assyrian idol or a Babylonian idol. It was God who controlled this whole thing. And this is the reason why you were exiled. Now, we can't understand that because we've always lived with a God who's not tied to the land. Okay. But if you go to someplace like Hawaii and you see the offerings at the volcanoes or in the secret hidden sacred spots, you begin to understand that it's very much rooted. The native religion in Hawaii is very much rooted in the land. So that, and that's why the eunuch takes away the dirt. But it's also the reason why they have to, but is God just part of the land and that's it? I mean, and once he's conquered, that's it. There's no more God. No, Israel decided that no, our God's not rooted to the land. We are, but not God. And so that's, move your butt, cat. That's the reason why they have to explain why they've been exiled. Now, this whole first, second Samuel, the Samuel and Kings books were all put together in the exile to explain why the exile happened. And they take out bits and pieces from all over to put it together. Does that kind of give you enough things to think about, Alexi?
I think gives us all to think about.
Because part of it is luck of the draw. I mean, you're given so much. It's like the parable of the talents. One guy's given 1 talent, one guy's given 3, one guy's given 10, and one buries it, one puts it in with the bank, one takes a chance and earns more money with it. All those, being given so much money is just what God does. And there's no rhyme, there's no justification in it. I mean, just because you were born in America does not justify you as a person. That gives you a different set of circumstances from being born in El Salvador or, Eritrea. And the kind of temptations for faith in the States is very different from the kind of temptations to faith in Eritrea, for instance. Because here we can ignore God because we've got health, and for the most part health, and we're not starving, and we've got a roof over the heads, and all that kind of stuff. We're not worried most of the time financially. And whereas one guy from India says, I want to go back to the United States where poor people are fat. It just it's a different set of problems here. But that, it doesn't let us off the hook. It just means that our set of problems are different. And, we need to be as much concerned about our Eritrean poverty as ours, because we have, the resources.
So as we journey with you in these books, should we really be thinking about this as how the Jewish people are understanding their relationship with God, and hold off on its applicability to our lives today?
Well, I think first you need to understand that primarily it's about the Israelites' relationship with God. Okay. And then when you got that down, then what's analogous to our relationship to God? Okay. It's not a direct, well, this is what I should do, but given these circumstances that they were under, and my circumstances, what's applicable? What's an analog? This is a type of thinking that we are not used to. We are used to cause effect. We're not used to metaphor and analog or analogy, which is too bad, because that's how human beings thought of things and places still do. I mean, if you've ever studied, let's say, the Chinese language or read the Tale of Genji, a lot of what happens in there, you have to, it's all done in metaphors. So, somebody leaves a little poem somewhere for somebody else, and, talks about chrysanthemums and, the morning dew, and you're supposed to interpret that as, well, does she want me or not? But it's all that metaphor stuff and the analogy. And so those two things aren't quite the same thing, but I think if you look at this, what's going on, what is trying to say to the Israelites about what, and then say, okay, how is this analogous to our life? I mean, Elisha sending bears to kill little boys who insulted him is not something that we're going to do, okay? It's kind of a creepy tale, but, it's there to show Elisha's power, and among other things. But you get the idea here of what we're going to go through. Okay. It's after 9:30. What to read? I would read like the first 3 chapters, but if you want to read the whole thing and then go back. So chapter 3, if you read through chapter 3, that's 2 Kings.
Gonna say, Kings 1, first Kings and 2 Kings.
So the second chapter is about, actually just read Kings 1 and 2. Because we're going to have to go back into Samuel to explain why David wants Solomon to kill a couple people. Again, mafia hit lords here. And you'll also get an idea of how what we call them the Deuteronomist, how the Deuteronomist inserts his or her ideas into the stream of the story. That Samuel is basically a stream, is a story of the history of how David becomes king. And so it's very much written kind of almost as a novel. At least that would be the equivalent thing for us. So if you want to go through 1st and 2nd Samuel, I mean, these are not long pieces of literature. They're more like novelettes, okay, 1st and 2nd Samuel. And so 1st and 2nd Kings, the 1st Kings chapters 1 and 2 takes you through the death of Solomon. Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm going to be using this book, which is the Hebrew Bible, translated by a guy named Robert Alter. And he's basically a Jewish commentator, but also a literary person. So he really looks at the language. And so he uses terms in there that polite translations don't use. And it gives you a better idea of what kind of the culture and stuff like that.
What was his name, Chris?
What? His
What
name
was-
is Robert Alter. And to tell you the truth, I walked into a board meeting and about half the folks in there were Jewish, and I had a copy of it that I just borrowed out of the library, and they said, "What is that huge volume?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this thing on Kings," and so I got Robert Alter's. This is just his volume on the prophets, which is 1st and
Wow.
2nd Samuel, and they said, "Oh, you can't go wrong with him. He's good." So it got an imprimatur from them. Okay.
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 Okay. So it's after 9:30, but it's good. You folks have a good week. And if you want me to send you anything, I will.
Yeah,
I mean,
could you
like-
send us the link, slide, thank you, slides, so that we could print them out?
Okay. Okay, I will send you the slides. I'll also send you the timeline as a separate sheet because the timeline is, I had a real hard time trying to get that thing in there. It's just like what the heck. So, but I'll send you the timeline as a separate thing. Okay.
Where did those maps come from? Those
Um,
are great maps.
Yeah. Basically, years ago, there were people who downloaded screenshots from books. And some of the books are actually online and you can do that. Some of them aren't. And I didn't put down where I got each map from. So,
I can just go poking around and see what I find.
okay. Yep. I mean, I got tons of
That's
maps. I just
Okay.
picked out the ones that were the most.
They're really cool maps.
Yeah, and especially the one here that we
First
want.
one.
I like
Oh, that's
Yeah.
Yeah,
that one.
good.
That is good. So,
Okay.
but we'll have maps of how they divide the two kingdoms and where. I mean, Solomon actually has a small empire by the time he
Yeah.
gets done, and he's actually probably as wealthy as they say in there. And when you see some of the stuff that they say, it's like drop mouth. But people have said, well, yeah, you could have done that.
Mom went to the parent meeting. Your mom went-
Okay.
All right.
Oh,
Thank you,
very much.
Chris.
Okay. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
And I will see you next week.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
You bet.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.